everybody. This morning we are making kohlrabi hash browns. Kohlrabi are related to broccoli and cauliflower and kale, that whole big family that is so diverse and amazing. And it's actually the swollen stem end of the plant, so it's probably most closely related flavor-wise to broccoli. It tastes a little bit like broccoli stems. I know people love it just sliced up and eaten with like ranch dressing or hummus, treating it like a fresh, crunchy vegetable. And that's a great way to do it. I also will throw it into kind of a general purpose cruciferous salad with broccoli and cabbage and other things. But I ran across this recipe. The Washington State Farmers Market Association put out a bunch of recipe cards for their participating farmers market years ago. And this was one of the recipes that they had listed. So instead of eating kohlrabi raw, which is what a lot of people do, you actually shredded it up and cooked it. And the first time we made this, we just treated it like hash browns. And added some Parmesan cheese, and we could not stop eating it. I think we ate it mostly out of the pan with our fingers before we ever even got it onto the table. So it's a really great, simple recipe. It's a nice way to get more cruciferous vegetables into your diet, and I'm going to show you how to make that today. So right now, I'm just peeling off the outer layer, and this has a little bit of damage. This is from slugs. When the plant is really small, slugs will come along and try to eat the stem. And they're generally unsuccessful in terms of hurting the plant, but it does cause scarring. And so you'll see one of these has got some damage from that. It's perfectly edible. You just cut that bit off. They tend to be more tough at the base, and so I'm going to do my best to trim that part off. Because it's definitely a little bit more woody down at the bottom. And the best time to harvest these size-wise is when they're about the size of a baseball. You can go larger than that, but they do tend to get more woody and tough, and so there's more waste if you wait. And so I like them a little on the smaller side because of that. Man, I had a lot of slugs in this particular bed, which is really unfortunate. Can't do a whole lot about it. I've got some great slug bait that's organic called Sluggo, and my dog is obsessed with it. And so every time I put it out around plants, he eats it. And we had a real scare at one point because he actually got into the container and ate a bunch of it, and I had to call poison control. And I don't know what it is about what's in there, but he is completely obsessed with it. And so I've been really hesitant to put out any slug bait in this bed because he has access to it. I need to build some kind of a fence where I can keep him out. And so the slugs, unfortunately, are just rampant, which is not what we want. See that? You can see that woody stem there. It's still, it's not so woody I can't put my fingernail through it, but definitely a little more woody than the rest of it. And I'm just going to shred these in the food processor because that's why I own a food processor. But you could certainly do this on a box grater without any issues. It would just take a little bit longer. And you can do this with just plain kohlrabi. You can do this with kohlrabi and add some onions. You can also add some potato and make kind of a mixed hash brown where it's potato and kohlrabi, which is what I'm going to do this morning. But there's a lot of different ways that you can deal with this, and they're all good. Basically, it's just a really yummy vegetable. Too much slug damage on that particular. And so again, it's very crunchy, and it tastes a lot like the root or the stem of a piece of broccoli, maybe a little bit sweeter. I have a friend at farmer's market, one of the fellow farmers, and he just eats them like an apple. Like, he really loves these. It's always funny to see him when kohlrabi season is in season, walking around the farmer's market eating them out of hand like an apple. They don't have a lot of that kind of broccoli cruciferous vegetable bite to them. They can, depending on when you harvest them and what the growing conditions were, they can get a little bit stronger, but I generally find them quite mild. So eating this raw piece just now, no issues. I'm not getting any of that really strong flavor, which is good. That's what we want. This is much easier to peel because it's not all damaged. And you can see how I'm peeling down. You can see some little lines there from the growth. I try to peel those off because those tend to be a little bit tough. And those are almost always towards the bottom. These are a great conversation starter when you are just harvesting them. I used to sell them at farmer's market. And people would always just be like, what is that? Because they look like an alien spaceship. And you almost never see them at a grocery store. I have very, very rarely seen them at a grocery store. It's one of those things that it's almost always you grow your own, or you see them at a farmer's market, or you don't see them at all. So it's kind of an unusual vegetable in that way. And people sometimes are hesitant to try things that are new. But honestly, yeah, they're an easy crop to grow. They're very fast. It's a one-off, so once you harvest them, you're done. There's one harvest. But it's a nice spring crop. You can do them in the spring and have them. And they also store really well. I've had these store for over a month in the crisper, so they store quite well. All right, let's shred these bad boys up. And that is why I own a food processor. I don't particularly love this one that I have right now. I don't recommend it. It's a Breville. And I've owned it for a couple of years. I bought it as a replacement for a really great KitchenAid that was so old that I couldn't get parts for it anymore, and I needed a new bowl. And so even though the motor was perfectly fine, I had to replace it because I couldn't get replacement bowls anymore. And the bowls do wear out, they crack. And anyway, so I bought this as a replacement instead of the Cuisinart that Cooks Illustrated had recommended. And I actually have one of those Cuisinarts in my commercial kitchen. And I don't love it either. It's actually a great unit, but I hate the way it's designed. And so I didn't want another one. And so I bought this as an alternative, and now I wish I just bought the Cuisinart, because this one has had a variety of issues. You don't really need any soap on that. Just rinse it off, it's fine. All right, so we're gonna put some olive oil in a pan. And you want to go fairly heavy on the oil in these. They have a little natural sugar, and you don't want them to stick to the cast iron. So, and you're going to be in here for a long time. We're going to basically slow cook these until they start to brown, and then flip them. If you've never made hash browns from scratch, there's a lot of different methods. One of the suggestions is to squeeze out the moisture that's in your potatoes and kohlrabi. You know, putting it in a dish towel and squeezing it out. I find that really fiddly. and then I have to wash a dish towel. And so I just often don't bother, even though it does make a better product. I just slow cook them and try to steam off all of that moisture. I'm going to put a little onion in here, so I'm going to cut up some onion as well. And because I've been recovering from COVID, you can probably still hear my congestion. For the first time ever, I ordered vegetables online from my local grocery store and then did a curbside pickup because I didn't want to expose anybody and we were out of some things. And I asked for 3 yellow onions, and I'm pretty sure these don't have a sticker on them, but I'm pretty sure these are Walla Walla Sweets. They just strike me as being more of a sweet onion. They're huge, for one thing, and they're just really juicy. Walla Walla sweet onions, most sweet onions, they have a higher water content. It's part of why they don't store well. And so I'm guessing this is a Walla Walla Sweet, which is not what I wanted, but it's fine. It'll go well in this recipe. I'm just going to put like a quarter of this in here. Notice how I left the pole end, so that's going to hold all my pieces together, which makes it much easier to slice. And there's a million ways to cut up an onion. Do what makes you comfortable. There's a lot of people that insist that one way is right and another way is wrong, and I'm like, you know, if it's efficient for you in your home kitchen and it's what you're comfortable with, do that thing. You're much more likely to cut yourself if you're trying to mimic somebody else's methods that aren't comfortable and familiar. If what you're doing is wildly inefficient, it doesn't hurt to try to learn new techniques, but if it's working for you, it's fine. Spread those out just a little bit. I love when you put oil in a pan and then realize your pan is not quite level. It's always because it's puddling on one side instead of the other. All right, I'm gonna turn the heat down a lot on this, and I'm just gonna try to evenly distribute the kohlrabi and the potatoes so they're mixed. And then we're going to add a nice dose of Parmesan at the end of the cooking and let that get a little bit of color on it. And that is just going to be awesome. And this will cook down quite a bit. This looks like a ton, but it'll reduce as the moisture gets cooked off. We're going to want to put some seasoning on that. And this is an all-purpose seasoning salt that I make myself years and years ago. Sorry, I'm stepping on an onion. Years ago, I worked in a franchise restaurant called Johnny Carino's. I don't even know if they're still around. And I worked in the back of the house in the kitchen because I really wasn't interested in dealing with people and doing service. And they made their own seasoning salt, and it was just equal parts garlic powder, black pepper, and salt. And I've been making it ever since. And I've since doctored it a bit, and so I now add a little bit of paprika. I grow my own paprika, and I like a little bit of that flavor and color in there. And so I add a little bit of paprika powder, not an equal amount, to the seasoning salt. But yeah, it's a great all-purpose seasoning salt, and I haven't bought an all-purpose seasoning salt in more than 20 years because I've been making my own. All right, I am going to leave this off to the side just in case I decide I want to let those steam a little bit. But I think if we just put this on the lowest possible heat and come back to it in about 5 minutes and see how it's doing, we'll just keep an eye on it and see how we're doing. All right, it's been about 5 minutes. Let's see how we're doing here. And at this point, I'm really not trying to brown anything. I'm trying to drive off a lot of the water that's in there. And so, low heat, essentially everything's kind of steaming, reducing. This is a long process, but it's also the kind of thing where you can do 6 other things while you're waiting for this to cook. So I just throw it on the stove and then go about my other morning chores and check back in every 5 minutes or so. Okay, so no real browning, but things are softening up for sure, and that's what we want to see. Let's give it another... I'm going to give it another 5 minutes at this heat, and then I'll start turning the heat up a little bit. All right. 5 minutes later. Oh, getting slight stickage. And actually, if I leave that to cook, that's mostly the starch from the potatoes that's causing that. And if you leave it longer, it crisps up and it actually becomes pretty easy to scrape off, but I'm just gonna scrub that off. All right, now so everything in here is nicely cooked at this point. The potatoes are getting soft, the broccoli the kohlrabi has lost a lot of its moisture. Still pretty wet. We're gonna turn the heat up just a little bit. And give it another 5 minutes. All right, 5 more minutes. So we're 15 minutes in at this point. See how things are looking. And now, getting a little stickage. I think what I'm going to do is actually let that go and really form a crust. And then I'll try to flip it with that intact. So rather than stir this and mess it all up and make it mushy, which is what's going to happen because at this point it's pretty soft, I'm actually just going to let it cook for another 5 minutes like it is. And then I will get a stronger spatula and try to flip it in chunks so that it holds together. Okay, so it's been 5 more minutes. I'm expecting to find some pretty good crust under there. And I really think most of the sticking here is because of the potatoes. I didn't rinse them. There's a lot of starch on them, and they're sticking to the pan. So you could obviously do this in a nonstick. And I've had it stick less without the potatoes added, so you can also just try it with just kohlrabi. See, we're getting some nice color on that. So I'm going to try to loosen everything up with this ancient metal spatula. I think I took this out of my stepmother's house, or she offered it up to me when I moved out of the house when I was like 18. And it's great. It's got this old Bakelite handle. And I for years I did not cook in cast iron. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And so I rarely used it because I couldn't use it in a nonstick pan. And so it's mostly sat in a drawer. And then now that I do a lot more of my cooking in nonstick or in cast iron, it's surprising how often I end up digging it out. It's a great spatula. It's got just enough stiffness that it's really good for scraping if stuff starts to stick. Okay, so we're getting where we want to be here. I'm going to give that another 5 minutes, and we'll see where we're at. We're getting close. All right, this is actually a little more than 3 minutes. And I'm slightly overcooked here. But look how much that's reduced. We have a whole lot less of a pan full of stuff. honestly, I think this is totally fine. It's not burned, it's just a little dark. I'm gonna turn the heat all the way down again. And now I'm gonna throw a little Parmesan on that and fry up some eggs, and we have breakfast. So yummy. Yeah, that's good. My husband, whenever we're in a restaurant and he's ordering hash browns, he always orders them extra crispy. So these are officially extra crispy. I overcooked them just slightly. But honestly, they don't taste burnt. I'm going to turn the heat off and just put a cover on that to give that Parmesan a chance to melt a hair. And I'm not going to try to cook, that's really out. I'm not going to try to cook eggs in the same pan. I think, given all the stuff that just happened in there, it's probably going to stick. So I'm going to use a nonstick pan on this. Fry up a quick egg. I've been using this as a olive oil dispenser for a million years. I bought it at some big box discount store like a Ross or a Marshall's. You know, obviously it's meant to be a salad dressing table thing. But I find it's really handy to just do a squeeze of oil on something without having plastic. I like it. Half the time when I do this, I overflow it and make a huge mess. But I've probably been using this container for 15 years. It's got a lot of life out of it for something that I bought at a discount store for probably less than $5 that came with oil and vinegar in it. Yeah, sometimes those little things do well. Okay. So this is what I do when I hard-boil eggs so that I can remember they're hard-boiled. These are turkey eggs, which we're still getting. We have turkeys that are determined to nest. And I keep finding the eggs there very delicious. But this morning, oops, cracked that one. I'm just going to do a regular chicken egg. This, by the way, is the compost bucket. So everything that goes in there either goes to the worm bin. Okay, well that was a sad looking egg. We might start over on that. That's kind of a mess. I'm going to throw a lid on that, cook it up, feed it to the dogs. We'll try again. All right, let's try this again. So as I mentioned, I have turkeys that have been trying to sit on eggs. And what happens is they sit on their eggs, and then the chickens see somebody sitting on eggs, and they start adding their eggs to the pile. And sometimes that egg's been in there for a couple of days before I catch it, and that's what that was, is a chicken egg that was a little more developed from being sat on. And it was probably fine to eat, but I wanted a runny yolk. So we're just going to start over. A little bit of all-purpose seasoning here. These are homegrown chicken eggs. Notice the color on the yolk. That is directly due to the fact that those birds are out on pasture. And so they're eating grass and bugs and all kinds of good things. All right, I'm just going to cover that and let it kind of steam. And we'll check back here in a minute. All right, while those eggs are frying, oh, those look beautiful. Perfect. I'm just going to turn that off. I'm going to plate up our kohlrabi, Parmesan, potato, onion hash browns. Cast iron pans hold heat well, so this is still pretty warm. The heat is off on my eggs, so they're just continuing to cook a little bit from residual heat. All right. And then eggs the way they should look. Dogs are going to get breakfast with the other ones. Just put a beautiful fried egg over the top of that. And there you go. Kohlrabi Parmesan hash browns with homegrown fried eggs for breakfast. Yum.